So most of you probably know that Dory will be retiring in December. And that's why I think she gave me this parable to preach on. She's like, I don't need that one. No, very difficult parable to discuss, but we will do that. We'll try our best to do that. But before I began, I wanted to sort of say, when one of the sort of cliches of preaching is people to quote, I've heard it quoted from different people, but I think it was Karl Barth who said it, preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Bring the Bible to the world and the world to the Bible. But I don't know about you guys, but the last few weeks I have found it very hard to stomach the newspaper. And I don't mean the sports news. That seems to be going pretty well. And the stock market, for some reason, is still doing well. But I mean this stream of this endless commentary and sort of apocalyptic warnings. It really, for me, has made me feel isolated. Like I really don't understand some of my neighbors. Like others have become somewhat alien to me. Even if I agree with some pundit, I know that on the other side there's a pundit with equal angst and anger saying the exact opposite thing. And I know from Aristotle that both things cannot be true at the same time. I've even heard my patients, I think the first patient Monday morning, spoke about a they who will have something coming to them. And I always wondered, who is part of this they? Am I part of this they? If this patient knew what I believe, would I be one of the they? And I feel like language cannot bridge this gap all the time, because it's immediately heard through some filter of belief and ideology. I think we really are in this state of Babel. Remember the Tower of Babel when people couldn't understand each other? And I wonder if there was something similar to that going on in Jesus' own time. Rabbis spoke in parables so that their audiences would not immediately understand the meaning, but have to struggle to come up with the meaning. And that meaning actually emerged in dialogue with each other and with the teacher, and with argument with each other and with the teacher. That perhaps contradictory meanings would have to be judged against one another. And they would have to know the teacher and his message to get the point. I think our parable today is one such story to struggle with and against in community, with those who are generous and gracious and hospitable and poor. Like I said, this parable is hard. It's probably got a lot of people scratching their heads. Is Jesus really saying that we should be somehow dishonest with wealth that is entrusted to us, or property that is not ours, but of which we are stewards? One's even tempted, and I think there have been people who have said this, to wonder if something got corrupted in this parable somewhere along the way. Some scribe made an error, and we could just sort of dismiss with it, But I don't think that's the way we're going to get out of this one. And I'll have to tell you, I actually like this parable. And I think I read it, especially through the final verses. One cannot serve God and wealth, which is actually, you'll hear it, mammon. You've heard that term maybe, mammon. Mammon is the Greek word that actually was newer in the time of Jesus. It wasn't like an ancient Greek word, but it was during the time of Jesus, this term mammon came out, and it means not just money. It does mean money, but it also means property. Remember, property and wealth was linked in those days. So one cannot serve God and property, God and mammon. And I think this is very consistent with Jesus' message. In fact, the story, the next chapter in Luke, right after this one, or the next verses, are about greed and about how greed is not good. This is not, I'll tell you, this is not the prosperity gospel that we're hearing. This is the gospel for the poor and for the exploited. And the miracle stories of Elisha, one of my favorites is the one about the oil jugs. In it, a woman has fallen into debt, and she encounters Elisha, to whom she tells her plight. She tells him that her 2 sons will be sold into slavery to pay off the debt. And this was not uncommon in those times, to actually be in what's called debt slavery. And often it would be your children who would become the slaves. And Elisha asks her, so what do you got? What do you have at home? And she says, well, I've got this little jar of oil. And he tells her to begin pouring the oil into jugs. And so she goes home and she gets her 2 sons and they begin pouring the oil into these jars. And she cannot fill all the jars. They keep multiplying and multiplying. She keeps pouring and pouring. And then she's able to sell those jars to pay off her debt. It's a very common theme in the Old Testament, the paying off of debt. Redemption means ultimately the paying off of debts. And how about Amos this morning, right? Like if you think, well, yeah, the gospel, that's probably not really about the poor. What does he say? He says, hear this, you that trample on the needy and bring to ruin the poor of the land. God will not forget your deeds. Your deeds that Amos goes on to recount about trying to wait for that Sabbath to get over so you can sell, or trying to, manipulate the weights and measures so that you can exploit other people. The Lord has sworn by the pride of Jacob, surely I will never forget any of their deeds. For the cause of the poor is God's cause according to the Bible. And even Luke's gospel, and his book of Acts reinforces this message. Remember, when Jesus goes out, he says that he has been called to preach good news to who? Good news to, do you remember, what is it? Good news to the poor. Remember that? And in Acts, property, mammon, is what? It is shared among everybody. Wealth is to be given away. So to my ears, that's what this parable is about. It's about the plight of the impoverished, the plight of the debtor, the plight of those who cannot make ends meet, the plight of those who cannot find dignified work, the plight of those who cannot support themselves or their families. To be in debt has been from ancient times a state of shame. Even we are so proud when we're out of debt. I was so proud when I paid off debt. And, you can listen to Dave Ramsey, who might be a little out of date now, I don't know. But Dave Ramsey's that financial guy, and what does he say? He says, rice and beans and rice until you're out of debt. And if you can't get out of debt, then you must be lazy. That you just don't have the discipline to eat rice and beans. Like I said, I'm guilty of that sentiment as well. I think it's baked into our very culture. To be wealthy is to be good and good-looking and worthy. And to be poor, to be without mammon, which, like I said, means property and wealth. In other words, to be homeless, is to be shameful and ugly and bad. And yet, Amos condemns us for this. And Jesus says, blessed and happy are the poor. And so let's remember this as we try to grasp this parable. When I first began to reflect on the parable, I thought of one of my favorite movies called The Incredibles. You remember The Incredibles, that cartoon thing? And one of the superheroes, he's really like a former superhero at this point in the movie, it's Mr. Incredible, is working for this insurance company. And I love this scene because partly as a doctor, me and my nurses have to contend with insurance companies and the internal workings of insurance companies all day. Anyway, he is finally fed up, Mr. Incredible's finally fed up, and he begins to help the customers navigate the arcane rules of the democracy and of the bureaucracy and the forms to get their money from the company. And then when he is found out, his boss, which is portrayed as this little puny guy, is like, they're penetrating the bureaucracy. And I always love that scene. Because I think Mr. Incredible is the steward in our story. He's helping the customers get through the layers of forms and phone calls that were put in place to block them. He sees the inherent injustice in the system and becomes a hero, again, though in a different way. And that's what I think the steward is doing. Debt was enslaving in ancient times. There was no bankruptcy filing. You were shamed, jailed, and your children were sold into slavery to pay your debts. And it's one reason why Jesus and his saving act is often described as redemption, or in the Timothy thing, as ransom, the letter to Timothy that we read today. It's literally being redeemed from slavery. Now, why do you think this image was so powerful to the ancient church? Do you think it's because they just were so into that internal idea of slavery? Or do you think that maybe being thrown into slavery was a real fear in those days? That maybe they or themselves or their family had a worry, or maybe it was a reality that they had really experienced, that someone in their family had been thrown into slavery. So like I said, I really think the steward is the hero in this story. The rich man is just that, a rich man, not God. It's the steward who fulfills the law. And Nehemiah, he writes, restore to them even this day their lands and their vineyards. Restore their olive groves. Restore their houses. Restore their money and the grain, the new wine and the oil that you have charged them. That word that we translate in this story as waste in the first line, or squander, really literally means to scatter. Okay, it's like scattering grain. So I think of it as the steward is actually sharing the wealth, scattering the wealth and sharing it, a little bit like maybe Robin Hood. All right, one final point and then we'll conclude. What is this thing about making friends with unjust mammon to sort of protect yourself? That doesn't seem to be like a gospel value. I think it means this: make friends with the victims of unjust mammon, with the victims of the unjust use of mammon to exploit others. It means seeing dignity in all people. And I think it means finding a community of those who are generous and hospitable and act against the prevailing judgments and polarizations of our times. Because you see, the gospel is not about amassing wealth. It's about giving it away. It's not about making the best investments for yourself. It's about generosity. It's not about hoarding and being frightened about what can be taken from you. It's about sharing courageously. To serve God stores up a different sort of wealth. It's a wealth born of mercy and compassion. A wealth born of humility to see those who are poor not as criminals worthy of punishment, but as friends just as worthy of a full life as you or I are. It's about being able to say of our good fortune, I am grateful. I am grateful for the grace of God that has been shown to me. For at any moment, what I have could be taken away. So let's not grasp too tightly onto anything, to our property, our wealth, our ideas, our feelings. Let us be able to be free of them, that we might serve others, and in them serve God. Amen.